So, Dr. Peterson, I have a lot of questions that arise from your comments at the Balfour 100 event, your M103 video, your recent discussion with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and your comments on Islam in the West in general. And in your comments, there's this common theme that one of these things is not like the other. You put the Judeo-Christian tradition on the one side and Islam on the other. Specifically, the, quote, complex problem of Islam and the, quote, as a, quote, totalizing system. And before I go further, let me state that if hypothetically a final analysis of Islam resulted in as total a denunciation as your analysis of postmodernism or neo-Marxism, I wouldn't be personally offended at all. This isn't a personal question. In your recent interview with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she said, Western values are superior to Islamic law and Islamic values. I agree with that, basically, certainly in the context of, let's say, current global affairs. I'll skip the quotes from a Reason magazine interview, but you should read them because hers is a worldview which is very much the West versus Islam, not radical Islam, but Islam, including necessarily the military option. So my question is, at the level of psychological significance of these stories, at the level of mythology and archetype, how is Islam so different from the Judeo-Christian tradition? You know, because Adam, Eve, Havva, Satan, Shaitan, so on and so forth, everything from the fall to the flood. A lot of what you discuss in this lecture series is necessarily part of Islam as well. And in fact, I think one of the strongest criticisms of Islam is that it's perhaps pretty unoriginal. You know, tonight you said that the moral presuppositions of a culture are instantiated in its stories. I see a lot of the same stories. So current global affairs aside, I'm asking at the deepest levels, how different are these stories and the moral presuppositions?
Okay, well, that's a killer question. Well, okay, so the first thing I would say is, fundamentally, I don't know. And so part of the reason that one of the things I'm planning to do is to have a series of discussions. And plenty of people have contacted me about discussing with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, because as you know, she has powerful and serious foes. And they're not happy with her black and white distinction. And so, now I read Infidel, and I really liked that book. Like my sense was that she was a heroine. Now, what that means in relationship to Islam, that's a different story, because she came out of a totalitarian, let's say, family structure in a relatively totalitarian society. And you could make the case that there's a correspondence between that and Islam, and you could make the case that there isn't. And of course, that's the critical issue. And so, there's a couple of things that I can't wrap my head around easily in relationship to Islam. And so one is what I see as the failure to separate church from state. And that's a problem. Now, it may not be a problem as such, but it's certainly a problem in relationship to the relation between Islam and the West, because we separate church from state. Now, there's fundamentalists in the United States, Christian fundamentalists, who think that that separation is a mistake. So it's not only an idea that's rooted in Islam that those should be united. But it's definitely a problem with regards to our coexistence, because that's a fundamentally different presumption. Okay, so that's problem number one. Problem number two, for me, and again, this may be a consequence of my ignorance, which I'm trying to rectify, Muhammad was a warlord. And I don't know what to do about that fact. Like, one thing you can say about Christ, hypothetically, let's say, I'm not talking about a historical reality necessarily, although I'm not denying it either, is that of all the things he was, warlord was definitely not one of them. And I don't know what to do about that. And so, I don't know how to reconcile that. And I don't know how to reconcile, like, not only was Muhammad a warlord, which I don't think is an unreasonable thing to proclaim, the expansion that he initiated was unbelievably successful. I mean, within 600 years, it was the biggest empire the world had ever seen. And it demolished Byzantine Christianity, which is something that Western people don't even know. You know, I've read thinkers who said that the West was so traumatized, culturally, let's say, by the demolition of Byzantine Christianity, that we can't even study it now. And so, I don't know if that's true, but I don't know that it's not true either. And The Buddhists were wiped out of Afghanistan, and we saw that echoed in the Taliban's destruction of those great Buddhist monuments. And so what I'm hoping is that there's a bridge. There better be a bridge. And that's why I want to have these discussions, because I'd like to understand if there's a bridge. And so lots of people have sent me people who I should talk to, who they think represent Islam far better than Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And perhaps they're correct, and hopefully I'll get an opportunity to talk to them, because I would like to know why. I would like to know if what I think is wrong. Because if it's wrong, it's important that I know it's wrong. But at the moment, I don't know it's wrong, and B, I don't see I'm not sure what it signifies. So, and I don't think anyone is sure, right? Because we have this entangling of the civilizations. You know, and there's other things too, like I'm not very happy with the Saudi Arabs and the Wahhabis. I don't think they're our allies. I don't see how any Western woman can possibly think that they're our allies. And I'm not happy with the fact that the petrodollars that we send them are transformed in substantial part into the kind of propaganda that's definitely a threat to the West. And I'm not very happy with the fact that our politicians appear stupidly blind to that. Now, that may again be a consequence of my ignorance. It's certainly possible. But those are the sorts of things that I can't reconcile. And so, you know, I've also seen parallels between the ideas that I'm presenting here and other religious traditions, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism. It's harder for me to bridge the gap with Islam, and I'm not sure why that is. I think it has something to do with the things that I just laid out. Now, what I don't know about Islam would fill very many volumes, many of which I have sitting on my shelves at home right now, because I want to do the reading, you know, as I progress through this. But yeah.
The big clash for the Western world is Islam versus Christianity. And, you know, people don't think about it in those terms because many intellectuals in the West think of themselves as secular, but it's a massive problem. And I'm hoping to conduct a whole series of conversations with Muslims, former and present, pro and anti, to try to facilitate a dialogue, because there's lots to talk about. I mean, I've studied religious thinking a lot, and I'm pretty ignorant about Islam because it's a complicated system and it's difficult to get into, but I can tell you that what I've read about Islam has not made me feel better about the chances of reconciliation between the Christian and the Islamic world. So, like, I don't know what to make of the fact, for example, I mean, if you look at the figure of Christ, and I don't care if you're religious or not, and I don't even care if Christ existed or not, and I certainly don't care at the moment about claims to divinity or the lack thereof. I'm just speaking as, let's say I'm speaking as a secular intellectual. I mean, as a figure, he's a figure of peace. I don't think that that's disputable. I mean, he wasn't a warlord. That's one thing that's for certain. He never led armies, you know, whereas that's not the case with Muhammad at all. Muhammad was clearly and indisputably a warlord. And so it isn't obvious to me what to make of that, except that it's bloody complicated.
He had a child bride as well, I believe.
Yeah, well, that one is somewhat less problematic to me, because I think that you can write that off to the cultural mores of the time. Now, I know that there's a weakness in that, but I don't think we have to address that. But when the founder of your religion spread that religion by the sword, it makes it rather difficult. And when your religion has been embroiled in a vicious civil war from the day of Muhammad's death, which is exactly the case in Islam between the Sunnis and the Shiites. That war started literally the day that Muhammad died. It's very difficult for me to see how that can be reconciled with the claims that Islam is a religion of peace.
Yeah, we saw that when Martin Luther hammered some stuff on a door a long time ago, and the Protestants and the Catholics just went their separate ways. And I mean, there's been some rough feelings over the years, I suppose, but no generational wars that I can think of. I mean, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was plenty, you know, as you said, there's been plenty of Christian schisms. But the other thing, too, is that it's not that easy to lay those at the feet of Christ, you know, because just even merely as an archetypal figure, you know, as the Western world's hypothesis of the ideal man. I mean, as a moral character, he was pretty much above reproach. And it's difficult for me to say the same thing about Muhammad. Now, that might be because I'm an ignorant, old Western white guy, but like, I'm doing my best, man. I'm a big admirer of Taoism, for example. There's great wisdom in Taoism, and I found real value in so much of the religious reading that I've done. But I'm really stumbling with Islam. It's really hard for me to see it as other than a primarily political system.
And that's how it's being enforced right now. That's what ISIS is all about. You know, they've established a religious caliphate, you know, across the borders of two countries. It's no less separation. About when I think of religion.
Yep. Sorry.
When I think of like the Christian religion, how it's applied here in my home state of Georgia, you know, it's when we go to church and we tithe, that has very little to do with politics at all. There's this huge, massive separation between religion and politics for the most part in the U.S. There are moments of ambiguity and tempers flare over a monument on this piece of property or no, but that's as stiff as it gets. Like the scariest bit of that I can remember, some drunk fellow ran over a monument for the Ten Commandments a few months ago and tipped it over. Like that's what happens when. But like to your point, like never, like if you're not a Christian, Kyle, and you're Christian kind of alcove there in Georgia, no one ever is going to come to you and say you have to pay a different rate of taxes. You have to go to different stores. You have to. The religious law will not be enforced as a law. You know, I'm not going to lose any hands if I can. You know, the Bible has many restrictions that it places on Christians, and I ignore all of them virtually. You know, like, but I know there's no religious police to come and kick my door in and drag me away and torture me and threaten my family and
well, and it's just, not, you know, it's also there's other cataclysms that are on that exist on in the conceptual realm as well. So, you know, the states dominated by Islam are not economically productive, and that's quite an interesting mystery. And
they're not.
And many of the Islamic states that we purport to regard as allies hold values that are antithetical to our system. And Saudi Arabia is a classic example of that. And I cannot, for the life of me, understand, except in a psychoanalytic manner, why the radical feminists tolerate America's ally, the fact that America is allied with the Saudis. It's just it's not much different as far as I'm concerned than it would be if black people didn't say anything if America was allied with a black slave-owning state, which of course also happens in Saudi Arabia, by the way, and not so in
the feminists. It's got to be because Muslims right now are higher up on the victim hierarchy than them. So even if it's way over there, they're not allowed to speak out against.
I think it's their unconscious wish for brutal male domination.
I don't think so.
Man.
I like that. That's fun.
I think it's the left's ability to apologize for anything that's wrong. I think the people on the left, maybe I'm just as crazy as you guys are. Like the Muslims oppress women. Oh, that's cultural. We need to understand that. Oh, guys think they're girls. That's, hey, we need to understand where they're coming from. Everything they're so open-minded to everything.
Like excuse making,
even if it's horrific.
Well, that's also the agreeableness, that we were talking about earlier. Yeah, because agreeable people agree. That's why the term exists. And so there is a real apology. And if you ally that with high openness, which is that open-mindedness, that's associated with creativity. You get agreeable openness, and that's definitely.
And then anything goes when you're agreeable and open. I'll call
Especially
you
if
Zer, and I'll forgive you beating your wife.
If you're low in conscientiousness, anything really goes then.
Bill Maher puts it nicely when he says, the left would not for 1 second be okay with apartheid in South Africa, right? They were just banging that drum, hating it every second of the way. But for some reason, the oppression of women in Saudi Arabia has gotten a complete pass.
Yep.
And it's a real deal, Saudi
Arabia.
It's
a real deal, yeah.
Heck, just the driving thing alone.
What do you...
Taylor, can you hold that?
They like her. Yeah.
You broke up.
You broke up. We couldn't hear what you were saying. You're still a little frozen. So, but yeah, just taking away their ability to drive, right? Women don't have mobility without men. That is hugely oppressive. If you made that change in America and none other, then women would be stuck at home.
You actually don't see a more concrete embodiment of the idea of individual autonomy than the automobile. I think maybe it was the Soviet Union's import and then manufacture of the automobile that doomed communism, because nothing screams autonomous individual like a car, right? You drive it yourself. You can go on any road. No one tells you what to do. It's freedom. And the fact that women can't drive in Saudi Arabia tells the entire story. And so the fact, I cannot understand for the life of me why we are so blind in the West that we make the assumption that